I still remember the exact moment I realized the tent was way smaller than we expected. We'd spent weeks planning this little weekend getaway, me and Ethan, my boyfriend of 6 months, and honestly, I thought I had it all figured out. You know that little itch when city life starts to feel like a cage? That was me last summer, desperate for a break, craving something simple. Ethan was right there with me, equally eager to escape the noise and screens. So when he suggested camping, I jumped on it, even though I'd never really camped before. We met in college, in one of those random film classes that neither of us really wanted to be in. Ethan was this easygoing guy with a crooked smile and a laugh that made you forget whatever was wrong. I was the quieter one, more comfortable behind a camera than in front of people. Somehow, we clicked. Over time, those casual coffee meetups and library study sessions turned into late-night talks and weekend hangouts. When he suggested we do something outdoorsy, I was all in, even if the outdoors was kinda scary to me. So there we were, standing in the parking lot of this outdoor store, both of us staring at a tent that looked way too small in the packaging. Ethan was all, "It's cozy, just the two of us. Intimate, you know?" I nodded, not wanting to seem skeptical in front of him. Truth was, I had no idea what to expect from camping. I pictured a little tent, maybe a couple of sleeping bags, some starry night sky, and lots of fresh air. Simple. Fast forward a few hours, and we're deep in the middle of this forest. The kind that smells like moss and pine and something wild and ancient. We found a spot by a small clearing, near a babbling creek that Ethan said was perfect for morning coffee. Setting up the tent was supposed to be the easy part, but as soon as we unpacked it and tried to unfurl the fabric, I realized that cozy was a generous way to describe this thing. It was, honestly, kind of ridiculous. The tent barely fit us sitting down, let alone lying down, and as I wrestled with the poles trying not to mess it up completely, Ethan was already laughing. See? Perfect for two. He teased, the way only he could, half amused, half affectionate. I wanted to laugh too, but all I could think was, how the hell are we going to spend a whole night in this thing? Still, there was something about that moment, his easy grin, the wild green all around us, the creek's soft murmur, that made my nerves settle just a bit. Maybe it didn't have to be perfect. Maybe the tent being too small was exactly the kind of uncomfortable, ridiculous thing we'd laugh about later. But right then, as I finally managed to get the last pole in place and the tent took its shape, I had no idea what kind of night we were in for. It turns out, small spaces tend to reveal a lot more than you expect. Once the tent was finally up, we huffed out a breath and looked at each other like, okay, now what? The sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows through the trees, and the temperature was starting to drop fast. I pulled a couple of sleeping bags out of the backpacks. Ethan had packed like he was preparing for a week in Antarctica, and I was just glad he was the planner. We shuffled inside the tent and immediately realized it really was as tiny as it looked. I mean, I'm not a huge guy, average height, pretty slim, but the amount of space was laughable. We managed to squeeze in, backs against the thin nylon walls, knees bent in weird angles. Somehow, Ethan made a joke about sharing body heat, and I tried not to laugh too loudly, because I was pretty sure my awkwardness was radiating off me like a heat source all its own. We sat there, the two of us pressed together, the outside world muffled by the fabric walls. The hum of insects buzzed faintly, and the creek's steady burble was like white noise. I looked over at Ethan's face, lit by the slanting rays of dusk filtering through the tent. His eyes were bright, tracing the shadows in a way that made me think he was already imagining the stories we'd tell about this trip. So, he said, breaking the quiet, "What's the verdict? Would you call this a success so far?" I shrugged. If by success you mean an intimate claustrophobia experiment, then yeah, nailed it. He laughed, that warm sound that always makes me feel like everything's okay. Yeah, it's definitely not the Ritz, but it's ours. There was a pause, the kind that feels comfortable between two people who know each other well enough to just be. Then Ethan shifted a bit closer, and suddenly the tent felt even smaller. "Can I be honest?" he asked quietly. "Always. I'm kind of glad it's this cramped." I blinked, surprised. "Why's that?" He smiled, just a little, and it was like the whole forest got quieter. "Because it means I get to be this close to you. No distractions, no space to hide." My heart did this stupid little flip, and I felt my face heat up. I looked away, pretending to inspect a random leaf that had somehow found its way inside the tent, but I could feel his gaze on me. We fell into a sort of easy silence after that, just the two of us breathing in time with the night. Outside, the darkness was thickening, and I realized I hadn't seen the sun go down at all. It was like the forest had folded itself into a pocket of shadow, cutting us off from the rest of the world. I tried to focus on the sounds, the creak, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional bird calling somewhere far away, but my mind kept drifting to Ethan's words. It felt strange and sweet and a little scary all at once. I guess that's what falling for someone feels like. You're this mess of nerves and hope, and then someone just looks at you like you're exactly where they want to be. After a while, Ethan pulled out a tiny camping stove from his bag and started fiddling with it. I watched him, fingers deft and sure, and it hit me again how effortlessly he seemed to handle everything, like he was born for this while I was still figuring out how to unzip the tent door. "Coffee?" he offered, lighting the stove with a practiced flick. "Yes, please," I said, already grateful for the thought. We sat side by side, the heat from the stove warming the cramped space even more. The smell of coffee filled the tent, mingling with the dampness and pine. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time since we'd arrived. "You know," Ethan said, stirring his cup, "I wasn't sure about this trip either. Thought maybe I'd end up bored or uncomfortable. But right now, this is nice. Weird, but nice." I nodded. "Yeah, I don't think I've ever spent this much time just with someone. Like, really together, no distractions." "Exactly," he said, grinning. "Just us, a tiny tent, and a whole forest outside that we can't even use because it's freezing." I laughed, and it felt good to laugh, genuinely, with no self-consciousness. Then the tent shifted as Ethan leaned closer, and I caught his breath near my ear. "Thanks for coming with me," he said softly. I swallowed hard and mumbled, "Thanks for asking me." And just like that, the tent didn't feel quite so small anymore. It was like some invisible wall had come down, and suddenly the closeness wasn't cramped. It was something warmer, something that made me want to stay right there forever. But just when I was starting to think this was going to be one of those perfect moments that you tuck away in your memory, I heard a strange rustling outside the tent. Not the usual forest sounds, the wind in the trees or a squirrel scampering, but something different, something closer. I froze, and so did Ethan. The noise got louder, a soft, scraping sound, like something was moving toward us through the underbrush. I felt my heart skip, and the stupid grin faded from Ethan's face. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Yeah," he said, suddenly serious. "Stay still." The rustling stopped. For a long moment, the only sounds were the creak and our breathing. Then, just as I was about to convince myself it was nothing, there was a sharp snap from just outside the tent. Something or someone was definitely out there, and for the first time tonight, the tent felt a little too small to protect us. Neither of us moved. The tent fabric rustled softly as Ethan shifted, his breath shallow. I could feel his body tense against mine, the heat between us suddenly replaced by this prickling unease. The scrape outside came again, this time accompanied by a low grunt that was definitely not an animal. Or at least, not one I recognized. My mind raced through every horror movie cliché I had ever seen, the ones where campers get caught off guard by some psycho or wild animal in the woods. But this wasn't a movie, and despite the panic bubbling up in my chest, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Maybe it's just another camper? Someone hiking nearby?" I whispered. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No one else should be out here at this hour. We're pretty far from any trail." We both fell silent again, straining to listen. The sound came again, closer this time, a scraping, then a whisper of fabric over leaves. I wanted to unzip the tent and peek outside, but the thought of what might be waiting stopped me cold. "Do you think we should call for help?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. Ethan pulled his phone out and flicked on the flashlight. the beam cutting weakly through the thin tent fabric. No signal. Great. No signal. Just us. A tiny tent, and whatever was lurking out there. Maybe it's nothing. I tried to convince myself, though my heart wasn't buying it. Maybe some animal, or just the wind messing with the branches. Ethan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced either. Let's just stay quiet and wait it out. So we did. The minutes dragged on, every little noise amplified in the darkness. I could hear Ethan's breathing, steady but quiet, and I forced myself to focus on that instead of the unknown outside. Then, suddenly, the tent door zipped open. I jerked back, heart in my throat, and saw Ethan's face illuminated by his phone light. Relax. It's just me, he said, grinning sheepishly. Dude, don't scare me like that, I whispered, half annoyed but mostly relieved. He crawled back in, closing the door behind him. I went to check. There's nothing. Just a fallen branch or something. I felt stupid for being so scared, but also incredibly grateful. Thanks, he shrugged. You're welcome. I'm not going to let some creepy noise ruin our trip. We settled back down, and the tent shrank around us once more, this time feeling more like a cocoon than a trap. Our earlier nervous energy melted into quiet comfort. I'm sorry I freaked out, I said after a while. I'm not exactly a wilderness expert. Ethan laughed softly. Neither am I. But I know one thing. If I had to face a sketchy noise in the woods, I'm glad it's with you. That made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't expecting. Same here. We lay back, shoulders touching, and this time the closeness felt right. The forest outside faded into background noise, replaced by the steady thump of our hearts and the soft rustle of the tent. For a long moment I just stared at Ethan's face, watching his eyes close slowly as his breathing evened out. The quiet vulnerability in that moment was something new between us, deeper than any conversation or joke. I reached out and took his hand without thinking, fingers lacing together naturally. He squeezed back gently, and I felt a warmth I couldn't quite explain. Hey, I murmured, thanks for inviting me on this crazy trip. He opened his eyes, that crooked smile spreading across his face. Crazy but worth it. And in the middle of that too-small tent, with the whole wild world just outside the thin walls, I realized something. Maybe being packed in tight like this wasn't a problem after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of something real, something messy, unpredictable, and honest. Just as I was about to say something else, a sudden chill ran down my spine. I heard it again, the scraping sound, faint but unmistakable, right outside the tent. I tensed, heart racing. Ethan's hand tightened around mine. Did you hear that? I whispered. He nodded, voice low. Yeah. We froze together, the noise coming closer this time. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. Not a wild animal, not a camper, but someone else entirely. Hey, the voice said, rough and tired. Sorry if I scared you. I'm lost. The relief that flooded me was almost enough to make me laugh, until I noticed the man's eyes shining strangely in the dim light, and the way he looked at us made me realize that this camping trip was about to get a lot more complicated than either of us expected. The man's voice was rough, worn from what I guessed was a long day, or maybe something worse. I squinted through the tent's thin fabric, trying to make out his features. He looked older than us, maybe mid-30s, with unshaven stubble and eyes that flickered nervously in the dim light. His clothes were dirty and torn like he'd been wandering through the forest for days. Ethan shifted beside me, tightening his grip on my hand. We exchanged a quick glance, silently asking the same question. Do we let him in? Are you okay? Ethan finally asked, his voice cautious but kind. The guy swallowed hard, then nodded slowly. Lost. Ran off the trail trying to find my way back. Phone died hours ago. He shifted his weight, looking embarrassed. I didn't mean to scare you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. There was something about his vulnerability that made me want to help, but also a flicker of warning I couldn't shake. I zipped the tent door open just a crack, enough to peek out without fully exposing ourselves. The man ducked inside, eyes flickering between us. The tent was tiny, way too cramped for 3 people, but he didn't hesitate. I moved over and made room for him, feeling Ethan's body press closer to mine as we all squeezed in together. The fabric walls suddenly felt even thinner, the air tight and thick with tension. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep the nervous edge from my voice. "Luke," he said, voice low. I nodded. "I'm Simon, and this is Ethan." He managed a weak smile, then sank down on the sleeping bags, pulling his knees up. "Thanks for letting me in." I didn't know where else to go. Ethan gave me a look, and I could tell he was on edge too. The forest outside suddenly felt less like a quiet sanctuary and more like a trap. "So, Luke, what happened? How'd you get lost?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He hesitated, then sighed. "I was hiking alone, took a wrong turn. Thought I could find a shortcut, but I just ended up wandering. No food, no water, and, well, I guess I'm lucky I ran into you guys." We all stayed quiet for a moment. The cramped space made it impossible to hide anything. Not our smells, not our nervous energy. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You're lucky we were here. We're just camping for the weekend." Luke nodded, eyes distant. "Yeah, I figured you were. I don't mean to impose." I shook my head. "No worries. We didn't plan for company, but, well, you're here now." He gave a small, grateful smile. "Thanks." The tent went quiet again. The creeks murmur outside a soft backdrop to our shared breaths. The closeness was intense. 3 bodies packed into a space meant for 2. I felt Ethan's hand brush against mine under the sleeping bags and squeezed it gently. I glanced at him, and his eyes caught mine. There was concern there, but also something like protectiveness. I couldn't tell if it was for me or just the situation, but honestly, I didn't care. I liked knowing he was there. Suddenly, Luke shifted, breaking the moment. "I don't want to be a bother. I can try to find my way in the morning." Ethan shook his head firmly. "No way. It's dark out there, and you're exhausted. Stay put. We'll figure something out." Luke looked at us, conflicted, but too tired to argue. I caught the way his gaze lingered on Ethan's face a little longer than expected. There was something about that look. Something raw. I cleared my throat. "We should probably try to get some sleep. We'll deal with this in the morning." Luke nodded, and we all settled into the tight space. The sleeping bags tangled around us, and despite the awkwardness, I found comfort in the closeness. Ethan's arm draped lightly over my waist, and Luke curled up as best he could in the leftover space. Sleep didn't come easy. Every little noise outside made me jump. Every movement inside the tent felt magnified. I kept catching Ethan's eyes in the dim light, searching for reassurance. After a while, Ethan whispered, "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah," I said, though my voice was shaky. "Just a lot to process." He nodded. "Me too." The night stretched on, and eventually exhaustion won. I drifted into a restless sleep, waking up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the tent walls. When I opened my eyes, Ethan was already awake, watching Luke carefully. "How you feeling?" Ethan asked quietly. Luke rubbed his eyes and gave a tired smile. "Better. Thanks for letting me crash here." We all knew this wasn't going to be a simple camping trip anymore. But somehow, despite the cramped space and the unexpected guest, I felt a strange kind of hope. Maybe this trip, small tent and all, was the start of something none of us saw coming. And honestly, I was ready for it. The first light of dawn made the tent glow a soft orange, and as I blinked awake, my limbs cramped from the awkward sleeping arrangement. Ethan was already stirring beside me, his eyes half open and watching Luke, who was sitting up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes like a kid who doesn't want to leave the warmth of his bed. Somehow, despite the tight quarters and the weird tension that had woven itself into the night, there was a quiet comfort in simply being here. 3 imperfect people crammed together, none of us quite sure how we'd got to this point. "So," Ethan said softly, glancing at me before looking at Luke, "how are you feeling?" Luke gave a tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Better. Thanks for letting me crash here last night." "I didn't have anywhere else to go." I nodded, stretching my arms over my head. "No worries. Honestly, I'm just glad you're okay." The silence that followed felt heavier than I expected. It was like we'd all been holding our breath, waiting for something to happen, or for someone to say the wrong thing. Finally, Luke broke it. "I'm sorry for just showing up like that. I didn't mean to impose." Ethan shook his head. "It's fine. We're not exactly experienced campers either. We're figuring this out as we go." I smiled at that, feeling the ease start to creep back between us. "Yeah, experienced isn't exactly the word I'd use either." Luke chuckled, a genuine sound this time. "Well, if you two can survive last night, I think you're doing better than most." I glanced at Ethan, who returned the look with a small smile and a shrug. The awkwardness was fading, replaced by something lighter, maybe even a little hope. "So what's your plan now?" I asked Luke. He hesitated, then said, "I was thinking of trying to find the nearest ranger station once the sun's fully up. I'm lucky I have a map, but I'm not exactly a navigator." Ethan frowned. "You think you can make it on your own?" Luke shrugged again, looking uncertain. "I don't really have a choice. I've been out here too long already." I bit my lip, suddenly feeling protective. "You can't just wander off alone like that." "It's still easy to get lost." Luke gave me a look that said he understood but was resigned. Then he said quietly, "I'll be careful." Ethan exchanged a glance with me, and we both knew what we were thinking. We couldn't just send him off on his own. "Not yet." "Why don't you stay with us for a bit longer?" Ethan suggested. "We're not going anywhere today." Luke hesitated, and I caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Gratitude mixed with something else, something guarded. "Thanks," he said softly. "I'd like that." We spent the next hour packing up the tent, the cramped quarters making everything take twice as long. Despite the lingering awkwardness, there was an easy rhythm to it, like the three of us were silently agreeing to make the best of this strange situation. As we folded the tent, I caught Ethan stealing glances at me, like he was trying to read my thoughts. I smiled back, feeling the warmth spread through me again. It was weird. Being this close to someone in a cramped space had forced something out of both of us, some honesty that wasn't there before. When we finally stood outside, the forest was waking up. Birds chirped overhead, sunlight filtered through the canopy, and the air smelled fresh and alive. Luke pulled his jacket tighter around him and looked at us. "I don't even know your story, you know." I laughed. "Fair enough. I'm Simon, a city boy who thought a weekend camping trip would make me feel alive. And I'm Ethan, my boyfriend, who somehow manages to be the calm in my chaos even when we're stuck in a tiny tent with a stranger. I like to think I'm the outdoorsy one, but clearly I'm still figuring things out." Luke smiled, and for the first time I saw something soften in his expression. "I'm Luke. I used to live here mostly, but I ran into some trouble that I guess I didn't plan for." Ethan looked curious but didn't press. The quiet invitation was enough for Luke to open up a little more. "It's complicated," he said, eyes flickering. "Let's just say I needed to get away, but then I got lost in more ways than one." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. Sometimes, getting lost was the only way to find yourself, but it wasn't an easy journey. "Maybe you found a couple of new guides," Ethan said with a smirk, nudging me. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling back. We started walking together toward the trailhead, the awkwardness melting away with each step. The forest felt less intimidating now, like it held possibilities instead of threats. As we walked, Luke told us stories about the area, hidden spots only locals knew, the best place to watch the sunset, how the creek changed course in the spring. Ethan and I listened, fascinated. It felt like a different world opening up right before us. At one point, I glanced at Ethan, and our hands found each other easily, fingers lacing together like they'd always belonged. Luke caught the glance and smiled softly, but didn't say anything. There was a quiet understanding between us all. This trip was no longer just about escaping the city. It was about connection, about finding people who understood the messy, complicated parts of life. By the time we reached the trailhead, Luke was ready to head toward the ranger station. We exchanged numbers, kind of a formality, but one that felt important. "I owe you guys," Luke said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Just don't get lost again." I laughed, and Luke smiled genuinely this time. As we watched him walk down the path, I felt a strange mixture of relief and something else. Maybe the hope that this weekend, which started with a too small tent and a lot of nerves, was turning into something none of us expected. I turned to Ethan, who gave me that crooked smile I loved so much. Same time next year? I joked. He laughed. Only if we bring a bigger tent. I nodded, knowing that whatever happened next, this trip had already changed us, in ways we were only just beginning to understand. We stood there for a few moments, watching Luke's figure shrink as he disappeared along the winding trail toward the ranger station. The sun was climbing higher now, dappling through the trees, and for a second the forest felt less like an unpredictable wild and more like a place where things could start making sense. Ethan tightened his grip on my hand, and I squeezed back without thinking. It was the kind of small, quiet reassurance I hadn't realized I needed until that moment. So, I said, running a hand through my hair, still feeling the stiffness from the cramped tent, "What now? We can't exactly just pack up and go back to the city yet. It's barely noon." Ethan grinned. "Well, I was thinking, maybe we find a better spot. One with a tent that doesn't feel like a coffin." I laughed, the sound light and easy. "Yeah, that sounds good, but I'm not exactly sure where we go from here." "Come on," Ethan said, tugging me gently by the elbow. "Let's explore a little. We're already out here. Might as well make the most of it." He led me along the trail, which curved through the thick forest, the ground soft with moss and fallen leaves. The air was still cool, but the sun was doing its job, patching warm spots here and there. As we walked, the tension from the night before started to dissolve, replaced by something more hopeful. We talked about everything and nothing, the usual nonsense you share when you're comfortable with someone. Our favorite movies, awkward childhood moments, plans we had for the future. It felt good, like the forest was giving us the space to just be. At one point, we stopped by a small clearing where the creek widened into a shallow pool. Ethan bent down, cupped his hands, and splashed cool water on his face. "Come on, you have to try it," he said, grinning. I knelt beside him and dipped my hands into the cold water. The shock of it made me laugh, and Ethan's smile was so bright it made my chest ache a little. "See," he said, "life's better when you get a little dirt on you." I looked at him, eyes catching the sunlight, and suddenly everything felt clearer. Camping wasn't just about roughing it. It was about moments like this. Unexpected, imperfect, and real. "What do you think Luke's doing right now?" I asked, breaking the silence. Ethan shrugged, hopefully finding his way back. "But maybe he's thinking about us too." I smiled, imagining Luke walking through the forest, maybe feeling less alone than he had the night before. We moved on, following the creek a little further until we found a rock big enough to sit on. We collapsed there, backs against the sun-warmed stone, and just listened to the water trickle by. Ethan said, "I was nervous about this trip. Thought maybe I'd mess everything up." I shook my head. "You didn't. It's been unexpected, but in a good way." He looked at me, eyes soft. "I'm glad you're here." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to say something clever, something that would capture everything I was feeling, but all I could do was smile and nod. "Me too," I said finally. We sat there for a while, the silence between us comfortable, like a secret only we shared. Eventually, Ethan pulled out his phone. Signal was still spotty, but he managed to send a quick message to the ranger station, just to make sure Luke was okay. "No response yet," he said, pocketing the phone. "But I'm sure he's fine." I hoped so, but I couldn't shake a little worry. There was something about Luke, something complicated, like he was carrying more than just the weight of being lost in the forest. As the afternoon stretched on, we made our way back to our campsite, this time choosing a spot that felt more open, with room to breathe. Setting up the new tent was a team effort, and I was surprised at how much easier it was with Ethan's steady hands guiding me. When it was finally up, it looked almost normal compared to the cramped nightmare from the night before. We laughed as we arranged our gear, and I caught Ethan's eye, feeling a spark of something that had been building between us all weekend. That night, as we sat by the campfire roasting marshmallows and talking about silly things, I found myself stealing glances at Ethan more often than I planned. The way the firelight flickered across his face made him look softer, more vulnerable. And when he caught me looking, he just smiled, that crooked smile that always made my heart skip. After the fire died down, we crawled into the tent, this one actually roomy enough for two, and lay side by side, the night sounds wrapping around us like a blanket. "I'm glad we did this," Ethan whispered. Me too, I said. And as I drifted off to sleep, I thought about Luke, about the strange, messy ways people come into your life when you least expect it. Maybe the tent had been too small that first night, but whatever came next was going to be anything but. The next morning, there was a calmness in the air, like the forest had sighed and settled after the chaos of the previous night. We packed up our gear slowly, moving with the kind of quiet that only comes when you're content and a little reluctant to leave something behind. Before we left, I checked my phone again. Still no message from Luke. Ethan sent another text with a little more detail, and this time, the reply came. Luke was safe, had made it to the ranger station, and was arranging a ride back to town. Relief flooded through me, and I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. We didn't talk much about it after that. No grand declarations or promises, just a shared understanding that something had shifted. The weekend that started with a too small tent and nerves had turned into a rare kind of togetherness. Between the cramped quarters and unexpected company, Ethan and I had found more than just a break from city life. We'd found a deeper closeness. As we walked back to the car, the sun warm on our backs, Ethan slipped his hand into mine, fingers intertwining naturally. I looked over at him and saw that same quiet smile I felt inside, the one that says you don't need a perfect setting or fancy plans to feel connected. I'm glad we did this, I said, my voice soft. Me too, he replied. Next time, though, maybe a tent that won't double as a sardine can. I laughed, squeezing his hand. Deal. Driving away, the trees gave way to open road and the noise of the world creeping back in. But something about that weekend stayed with me. The way closeness can grow when you're forced into it, the way vulnerability can build trust, and how sometimes the smallest spaces hold the biggest moments. Ethan glanced over at me, his eyes warm. Same time next year? I smiled, feeling my heart settle in a way it hadn't before. Definitely. And just like that, the tent that had seemed way too small became a symbol, not of discomfort or awkwardness, but of a moment that brought us closer. A memory we'd carry with us, no matter how big or small the space we found ourselves in. Sometimes, love doesn't need room to stretch. Sometimes, it just needs to fit.